The silence between them, it started with silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that whispers something is breaking. People had seen Keanu Reeves and Alexandra Grant walk hand in hand at events, always calm, always gentle. They were not loud like other couples in Hollywood. Their love was quiet, mature, built on respect and deep understanding. But somewhere in that silence, a small distance began to grow, one that neither of them wanted to see. It began after Keanu finished a film that took him months away. Alexandra waited for him, painting late into the night, her heart somewhere between the canvas and the clock. When he returned, she smiled, but her eyes searched for the man who used to look at her as if she was his piece. Instead, he looked tired, lost, like someone carrying too many ghosts. Keanu had always been known for his kindness, his humility, his patience. But fame is heavy. Sometimes even kindness bends under its weight. He didn't know how to talk about what he felt, the grief he never healed from, the loneliness that fame could not fill, the fear that maybe love was not meant to last forever. Alexandra saw it all, but she didn't push. She had learned that love is not always about fixing someone. Sometimes it's about standing quietly beside them. Days turned into weeks. Dinners were shorter, calls were fewer. When Alexandra mentioned her next art show, Keanu said he might not attend because of work commitments. She nodded, but her hands trembled when she picked up her brush later. She painted a man fading into blue, the color of memory, the color of letting go. One night they sat together on the balcony, the city lights below them like a sea of quiet stars. Alexandra asked softly, "Keanu, are we okay?" He looked at her for a long time, as if searching for an answer he had lost long ago. "I don't know," he whispered. That was the first crack. Small, invisible to others, but sharp enough to draw blood inside their hearts. The next morning, she left early for the studio. Keanu stayed home, staring at the empty chair across the table. He remembered how they once laughed over burnt toast, how she teased him for always wearing black, how her smile made even his worst days lighter. Now, the silence between them felt louder than any argument could ever be. That night, when Alexandra returned, he was already asleep on the couch. She stood for a long time watching him. She wanted to touch his hair, to whisper, "Don't drift away," but she didn't. Instead, she quietly covered him with a blanket and walked to her room. Sometimes love doesn't end with a fight. Sometimes it ends quietly in the spaces where words used to live. And as the night deepened, both of them dreamed of the same thing, a version of love where they still reached for each other. And the silence never came. The goodbye they never said. The following weeks felt like walking on thin glass. Keanu and Alexandra tried to act normal, but even laughter began to sound rehearsed. Their friends noticed the way her eyes searched for his, the way his hand no longer reached for hers in public. They weren't angry with each other, just lost, like two travelers on different roads, still hoping they might meet at the same horizon. Keanu buried himself in work. Long filming days, late-night rehearsals, endless interviews. When reporters asked about Alexandra, he smiled politely, saying, "She's wonderful." But his eyes told another story, one of distance and quiet regret. Alexandra, meanwhile, threw herself into her art. Her new exhibition was called The Spaces Between. The paintings were hauntingly beautiful, lovers standing close but never touching. People called it brilliant. Only she knew it was a goodbye letter written in color. One evening, Keanu came to her studio unannounced. He stood at the door, watching her paint with trembling hands. The smell of turpentine and rain filled the room. She turned, surprised. "Keanu," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I just wanted to see what you've been creating." They walked through her paintings together. Each one felt like a memory of them. The quiet mornings, the half-finished coffees, the silent drives through Los Angeles when words felt too heavy to speak. Finally, he stopped in front of one painting, a shadow of a man dissolving into light. "This one," he said, his voice breaking. "It feels like me." Alexandra looked at him, her heart aching. "It was," she whispered. For a long moment neither moved. They stood there in the fading light, two souls still bound by love, but separated by time. Keanu took her hand gently, the same way he used to. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "And I don't want to hurt you anymore," she smiled, but her eyes glistened. "Sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go before it turns into pain." He nodded, his throat tightening. It wasn't a breakup, not officially. There were no harsh words, no slammed doors, only understanding. Quiet, painful understanding. When he left that night, she stood by the window watching his motorcycle disappear into the rain. Every drop that hit the glass sounded like a memory falling apart. She whispered his name, not to call him back, but to let it echo one last time before it faded. In the days that followed, paparazzi still photographed them separately. Headlines speculated, "Are Keanu and Alexandra over?" Neither confirmed nor denied. They simply disappeared from each other's public lives. But deep down, they both carried the same truth. They hadn't said goodbye because neither of them truly could. Some connections don't end. They simply transform into silence, into memories, into lessons that stay long after the people have gone. And though the world saw peace, their hearts still whispered the same unspoken question. What if we had tried one more time? The photo that broke the silence months passed like slow rain. Keanu's days were filled with cameras and lights, but his nights were quiet, almost too quiet. Sometimes, between takes, he'd find himself scrolling through old photos on his phone. Alexandra's smile, her grey-streaked hair glowing under sunlight, the way she looked at him, like he was the safest place in the world. He never deleted them. He couldn't. Alexandra, meanwhile, traveled to Europe for an art residency. Paris, Berlin, Florence, cities filled with life, but none of them felt like home. Every painting she made had traces of him, his shadow in her lines, his soul in her colors. She tried to convince herself that it was just nostalgia, but every brushstroke betrayed her heart. One morning, everything changed. A photo went viral. Keanu was seen having dinner with a young actress in New York. They were smiling, sitting close. The internet exploded. Keanu Reeves moves on. New love after heartbreak? The headlines were loud, cruel, invasive. Alexandra's phone buzzed non-stop with messages she didn't want to read. She stared at the photo for a long time. At first her chest tightened, then she smiled softly. Not out of anger, but understanding. She whispered to herself, "He deserves peace." But later that night, when she stood alone in her hotel room, her heart betrayed her calm. Tears came quietly, falling onto a canvas she was working on. A painting of two hands, almost touching, separated by a thin crack of gold. Keanu saw the photo too. When his team told him about the rumors, he shook his head. "It was just dinner," he said, his voice distant. "But I guess people see what they want to see." That night, he sat by his window staring at the city lights. He realized something painful. He hadn't really moved on. The thought of Alexandra seeing that photo made him ache in a way words couldn't explain. A few weeks later, Alexandra's new exhibition opened in Berlin. The crowd praised her work, calling it her most emotional collection yet. One painting in particular drew everyone's attention. A man standing under rain, his reflection broken into fragments of light. The title read, "The One I Still Wish Peace For." Keanu saw the painting online. No name was mentioned, but he knew. He felt it in his bones. Without telling anyone, he flew to Berlin. He arrived quietly, wearing a black coat and humility. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to see her art, her truth, her heart. When he walked into the gallery, people whispered, recognizing him. But he didn't care. He stood before her painting, eyes glistening, the world fading around him. Behind him, a soft voice said, "I didn't think you'd come." He turned slowly. Alexandra stood there, calm, radiant, and strong. Years of love and silence between them, now standing face to face once more. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the world, but for her. The rain that told the truth, the air in the gallery felt heavy, like the world had paused to listen. Keanu and Alexandra stood only a few steps apart. yet it felt like miles. The crowd moved around them, flashes of light and quiet murmurs. But their eyes were locked, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. "You look different," Alexandra said softly. Keanu nodded, smiling faintly. "You too. Stronger." They walked to a quieter corner, away from the people, where a large window overlooked Berlin's evening rain. Droplets tapped gently against the glass, and in that rhythm, their hearts began to remember what words had forgotten. "I saw the photo," she said finally. Her tone wasn't sharp, just honest. "I know," he replied quietly. "It wasn't what people thought." She gave a small smile. "I didn't think it was, but it reminded me how fast the world moves on, and how slow the heart does." He looked at her then, really looked. The calm lines on her face, the wisdom in her eyes, the strength she carried even in heartbreak. "You've always been stronger than me," he said. She shook her head gently. "No, I just knew when to stop fighting for something that was already fading." Keanu's hands tightened slightly. "But it never faded for me." Those words hung between them like a fragile bridge, trembling but alive. She looked down, her breath trembling. "Then why did you leave, Keanu?" He hesitated. The truth was raw, but it was time. "Because I thought you deserved someone lighter. Someone who didn't carry as much loss as I do. I was scared I'd pull you into my darkness." Alexandra's eyes softened. "You were never my darkness, Keanu. You were my peace." But peace needs presence, not distance. Rain streaked down the window behind them, almost like tears sliding down the sky. For a moment he closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. "I've spent so many nights replaying it," he said. "The things I didn't say. The love I didn't show enough. The silence that broke us." She stepped closer, her voice trembling with old emotion. "And I spent so many nights painting you out of my heart, only to realize you were part of my soul." Their eyes met again. No bitterness, no blame, just love. Wounded, but still alive. A flash of lightning outside illuminated them both, standing inches apart. Two people shaped by pain, but still bound by something deeper. "Maybe we were never meant to end," Keanu whispered. "Maybe we just paused." Alexandra exhaled, the faintest smile touching her lips. "And maybe this rain is the universe pressing play again." The sound of thunder rolled softly through the city. But in that quiet corner, something inside both of them began to heal. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise anything. They just stood together, watching the rain, letting forgiveness find its way back between them, and for the first time in years, the silence between them felt peaceful again. The letter he never sent. After that night in Berlin, Keanu returned to Los Angeles. Alexandra stayed behind for her exhibition tour, and though they didn't promise anything, something unspoken connected them again. It wasn't love reborn overnight, but a quiet thread of understanding that neither of them wanted to cut this time. Days turned into weeks. They began to exchange messages again, soft, simple words that carried more feeling than grand speeches ever could. "How's the rain tonight?" she'd text. "Loud enough to remind me of you," he'd reply, but even gentle healing can be fragile. Keanu's next film took him far away again. Long hours, new faces, unfamiliar cities. Alexandra understood, but distance is a thief, stealing small moments until connection feels like memory. One night, while filming in Japan, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room, unable to sleep. The city lights blinked like restless thoughts, and his heart felt heavy with things left unsaid. So he opened his notebook and began to write her a letter, the kind of letter no one ever expects to send. "Dear Alexandra, sometimes I think love is not about holding hands, but about holding hearts, even when miles apart. I never told you this, but every role I play, every word I speak on screen, somehow traces back to you. You gave me peace in a world that never stopped spinning. I used to believe my pain made me unworthy of lasting love. But you showed me that broken people can still love beautifully. I want you to know that even if our story never finds its ending, you will always be my favorite chapter. Keanu." He read it twice, smiled faintly, and folded the page. But he didn't send it. Maybe he was afraid it would reopen old wounds, or maybe he believed some emotions are meant to live in silence. He placed the letter inside his journal and left it there, a truth only the night would ever know. Meanwhile, in London, Alexandra received an invitation to attend his film premiere. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to see him, to know if the warmth in Berlin was real or just nostalgia. After a long pause, she packed her dress and ticket, whispering to herself, "Some stories deserve a second ending." The premiere was crowded and bright, flashes and noise everywhere. Keanu walked the red carpet with his usual calm grace, his eyes scanning the crowd without expectation, until he saw her. Alexandra stood quietly near the corner, a small smile on her lips, wearing the same soft blue that once matched the color of her studio walls. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world went still. All the cameras, all the noise, none of it mattered. She mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." He nodded, emotion tightening his chest. He wanted to run to her, to tell her everything, about the letter, about how nothing had felt whole without her. But before he could move, the crowd swept him forward. When he turned again, she was gone. Later that night, he searched for her everywhere, but she had already left the city. All that remained was a single white envelope left with a stagehand addressed to him. Inside was a note written in her delicate handwriting. "Sometimes we don't need to go back to the past to find peace. Sometimes peace is knowing we loved honestly. Thank you for being my calm in the chaos." "Alexandra." Keanu held the letter close to his chest. "For the first time in years," he cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude for a love that had been real, even if it couldn't last forever. The peace they finally found months later, life had moved quietly forward for both of them. Keanu's movie became a success, praised for its depth and emotion. Interviewers called it his most vulnerable performance ever. They didn't know why his eyes looked so real when he spoke about love and loss, but he did. Alexandra watched from afar, smiling softly every time his name appeared. She didn't reach out. Neither did he. They didn't need to anymore. Some hearts stay connected beyond distance, beyond words. One evening, Keanu was driving through Malibu when rain began to fall. Soft and familiar, like the kind that once spoke for them in Berlin. He parked his car by the ocean and just sat there watching the drops hit the windshield. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt grateful. Grateful that he had known love that pure, that patient, that real. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, Alexandra prepared for another exhibition. It was titled Unfinished Letters. The final piece was simple, a small glass case containing a folded note that read, "To the man who taught me that silence can be love too." People stood in front of it, many moved to tears. But Alexandra just smiled quietly. She didn't need to explain. A few weeks later, fate decided to write its own ending. Keanu was invited to an art charity event in New York. He almost didn't go until he saw Alexandra's name listed as one of the featured artists. He hesitated, then whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time." The hall was warm and full of quiet conversation. He walked past paintings and sculptures, searching without knowing what he was looking for, until he saw her. Alexandra stood near one of her paintings, dressed in soft silver, her hair tied loosely, her eyes calm and kind as always. She noticed him instantly. Time didn't pause this time. It simply softened. He walked up to her, smiling gently. "Oh, you're still painting hearts, I see," she laughed softly. "And you're still breaking them on screen." They both laughed, not awkwardly but freely, as if life had been waiting for this sound. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the kind that used to hurt but now healed. "I kept your letter," she said quietly. Keanu froze. You found it?" "Your publisher sent me your journal for a collaboration," she explained. "I wasn't supposed to open it, but I did, and I'm glad I did." He looked down, shy, but she touched his hand. "It was the most beautiful thing anyone ever wrote to me." He met her gaze, his voice low. "Do you think love like ours ever really ends?" She shook her head. No, it just changes shape until it becomes peace. The music in the background grew softer. The room blurred as they stood there, two souls no longer chasing, no longer hurting, just thankful before leaving. Keanu said, "If this is our final chapter, I'm glad it ends with peace." Alexandra smiled. Peace and love, always. They hugged, not as lovers lost, but as two people who had finally forgiven life for its timing. And when they let go, there were no tears, only light. That night, as Keanu drove away, he glanced at the ocean once more. The rain had stopped and the stars were out. Quiet witnesses to a love story that didn't need a forever to be real. Some stories don't end with heartbreak or reunion. Some end with understanding. And theirs, at last, had found its peace.